this is your host, Julia Napini. I am a clinical and forensic social worker who owns a counseling practice and a consulting business. In this show, we discuss the challenges of being successful in business while maintaining your integrity and staying true to yourself. Join me while I interview other professionals and share insights from life and experience. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Compassionate Climb podcast. You guys are all in for a treat today. We are going to have a conversation that I anticipate is going to be very interesting for all of you. So I am here today with Carolyn Wallace. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks, Julia.
Yes, I'm happy to have you. So tell us about yourself. Give us a little bit of background.
I am a psychotherapist working in Massachusetts. I'm also a spiritual director and a certified archetypal consultant, which means I work with women to help them figure out which archetypes resonate most deeply for them. So the reason for doing that is to help women transform their relationship to fear so they can start making choices coming from a place of empowerment rather than a place of fear or self-sabotage.
So I was very intrigued by this and definitely wanted to learn more. So help us understand how this is something you became passionate about.
I became passionate about it. First of all, I've always been interested in archetypes. I took a workshop 2 decades ago with Pearson, who's done a lot of writing about archetypes. So it's always been an interest of mine. When I enrolled in the course where I became certified, the Sacred Contracts course with Carolyn Myss, I was in an unhappy marriage. I had 2 kids. I was home with the kids. I still worked full time, but I was the only adult home taking care of these kids. And I did have a partner and he wasn't around. And I was becoming increasingly confused, and I was confused, and we did couples therapy, and I would pout and I would say, this doesn't work for me. And, I get louder, sometimes louder, and so I started watching these videos and one of them was the victim archetype. And not only did this person on this video identify the victim and provide me with words to describe what I was unconsciously feeling, she also showed the path out of being a victim. She described what the victim needs in order to become empowered. And that just completely blew my mind. It changed the entire trajectory of my life.
So not only did you resonate with what you were hearing, and I'm sure it normalized things for you, and there's other people out there like this and they get it, but then in addition, almost gave you this step-by-step for how to transcend the experience and not stay stuck.
That's right. And, you might think that as soon as I figured out that I was being a victim, and what a victim needs to do is to develop boundaries through the archetype of the warrior. So in order to eventually become the guardian of self-esteem, that's the path of the victim archetype. You might think that I just woke up the next morning and said, I'm out of here, but that's not how it happened. I had to develop those boundaries over time. Yeah. And so I always say the first thing I started doing actually was start going to the gym. And that was like a real step forward for me, because I was creating boundaries and doing something for myself, and that's how that path started. It unfolded over the course of the next year until I eventually moved out, got an apartment, got a divorce. It took a while.
I think that's helpful for listeners to hear, because even though you may develop this awareness or have this light bulb moment or make a connection, everything is a process, and there isn't a set time frame for any of it. But I think it sounds like once you know, you can't unknow this information. It's what you do with it.
That's exactly right. Once you know, then you kind of have a responsibility to do something about it. Yeah.
So can you give us a brief overview of each of the different types? How many are there?
Well, there's hundreds of them.
Oh boy.
So different types of archetypes. Well, there's survival archetypes. There's 4 of them that every person has. They're universal. And those are the victim, the saboteur, the child, and the prostitute, which if you want me to explain those more, I can. So everybody has some familiarity with them. But then there's lots of other ones
Mm-hmm.
that are like helper archetypes. There's the rescuer, there's the healer type archetypes. There's the visionaries and the pioneer, which I was thinking maybe about you when you were talking about like, developing your podcast. Some people just have these ideas and they're the first to have these ideas and they run with them. And that would be a pioneer or
Mm-hmm.
a visionary. There's the rebel archetype. There's just so many different kinds. There's the warrior, like we said before. And then there's all the ones about nobility. If you want to carry an aura of nobility, you might have the diva or the queen or a princess.
So, what is the best way for someone to get clarity on where they fall or who they align with?
There's a link if you Google Gallery of Archetypes. There's a big long list of about 72 archetypes, and
Okay.
that I will send someone that link if they come to work with me.
Mm-hmm.
There's also, I mean, there's hundreds of archetypes. 72 doesn't encompass all of them. So if people are looking for more, it depends what they resonate with. I would steer them toward, if someone wants to look at the goddess archetypes or the god archetypes or the Roman or the Greek gods, there's just so many places to look for archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of have to do your own exploration.
So I will include that link in the show notes if anybody wants to
Right?
explore. But once somebody has a basic knowledge, are you then working with them one on one to increase their understanding?
Yep. Well, what people do is generally, once I send them the link, they will take maybe 2 weeks to sift through them all, do some of their own research. They may come back with, say, 20 of them. And what I help them do is distill that 20 down to 12. We want 12. So we've got the four survival archetypes. So they need to
Mm-hmm.
pick 8 others that really resonate with them. And we're talking like patterns since childhood. So we kind of talk
Mm-hmm.
about not an archetype that they want to have, which I get. That's for later on if there's more work to do. But for your original chart of origin, we want your original 12. And then after that, we can talk about how each of those 12 works in the different houses of the archetypal wheel or the
Mm-hmm.
astrological wheel. And we can talk about how you can evolve them from shadow to light in each area of your life. And so it's a really powerful program. It's a 90-day program I call the Transformative Power of Archetypes, 90 days from living in shadow to claiming your unapologetic confidence.
Wow. So where did this all originate from?
Where did archetypes originate from?
Mm-hmm.
I think they originated from hundreds and thousands of years of human beings
Mm-hmm.
occupying the planet, and things crystallized in collective unconscious into patterns. And archetypes are patterns that we can recognize in others and other people recognize in us. So they're
Mm-hmm.
very recognizable. People know about archetypes. Like if you see someone behaving like a bully and you say, oh, look, that person's being a bully, like we all know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you see a firefighter going into a burning building, that's a rescuer. There's no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking about comparisons and other tools that we can use throughout our journey of self-discovery and enlightenment. So I'm thinking personality types. So I'm very familiar with the Enneagram, which focuses more
Mhm.
on your motivation, or
Yeah.
the Myers-Briggs, or so what would you say really differentiates this in addition to there's so many and there are categories and it sounds like you really will read and kind of choose who you resonate with. But beyond that, what would you say really differentiates this information or like tool from maybe a personality type or something else that you might use in your work?
Sure. Well, I think it's just a different lens to look
Mm-hmm.
at yourself through. What I love, and this may also be true with the Enneagram too, but what I love about archetypes is that we talk about the 3 levels of consciousness, which I won't
Mm-hmm.
get into now because there's too much, but ultimately what you're doing is you're evolving old stuck patterns through patterns that you make an active choice to change. Like when I started going to the gym, that was an active
Mm-hmm.
choice. But then through your efforts, a piece of divinity comes to meet you. And there's a piece of divinity that you're not really probably going to get from a personality test.
Mm-hmm.
There's archetypes can become alive as you work with them, as you journal with them, as you ask them to become part of you. I had an example of I used the victim and the child archetype to help me solve a tax problem, and they became alive for me, and they gave me the
Mm-hmm.
guidance I needed to call just the right person. A tax problem I had been fretting about for a year, this person solved the problem for me within like 3 days and cost me
So can
150.
you explain that a little bit more, how they came to life for you?
Sure. So when I first got divorced, our my ex's taxes, and we did our taxes together. And so the first year I was a head of household, everything got all mixed up. And the IRS, this is during COVID and nobody was answering the phones at the IRS, told me that I owed all this money, which was not true. And I could prove that it wasn't true.
Mm-hmm.
So, they say, well, send all your proof in. So I did. And then I still was getting letters. Like nobody was opening the mail at the IRS. And I just kept getting more with higher and higher amounts because like they were thinking I wasn't paying anyway, it was this whole thing. So one day I said, all right, I am really feeling like a victim here. And I'm really feeling like a child who's being really misunderstood. And someone's telling me I'm doing something wrong when I know I didn't do anything wrong. So I sat at my kitchen
Oh.
table and I started journaling. Okay, what would the victim do? The victim starts having boundaries and starts becoming more of a warrior. And what does a child do? A child stops feeling like they can't protect themselves and starts calling in like a sovereign energy. A sovereign is someone who is in charge of their life and can protect themselves and be an adult and handle things. And as
Mm-hmm.
I was writing to these like lighter sides of these archetypes, the idea came to my mind, why don't you look up a tax lawyer? So, I just used Google and looked up these like high powered tax lawyers, which is really funny because like my situation, I'm not a high power, like, I wouldn't, but when I realized that there are these people out there who could advocate for me on my behalf, if I
Mm-hmm.
paid them to do it, I was going to be okay. And it just completely changed my energy. And I wound up not going with the high powered, like international tax lawyer. I wound up going with someone much cheaper and within the range that I was dealing with, solve the problem like within a few days. Done.
Mm. What a great example of how you use that to solve a problem, but kind of like weaved it and called upon this additional insight, looking at it in a different way. And it sounds like trying to change the narrative. This is making me think of maybe kind of a narrative therapy model where it's like
Maybe.
we
Yeah.
form these stories early on and they can be reinforced by our experiences and significant people in our life. And if we're not aware that they're there or what contributed to them, we can carry them into adulthood, but we do have the power to change that narrative. And it sounds like you now have these additional resources to call upon in those times.
And I love what you said about becoming aware of them because before someone had defined what a victim archetype was, I was just spinning in circles, not liking my
Mm-hmm.
circumstances, but I didn't know that there was a pattern there and that I could
Right.
change the pattern. I was completely oblivious to that. So that's what I'm wanting for other women.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that you work with clients specifically on this, but do you also weave this in your clinical work?
I do. I do. I don't go through my 90-day program with the people,
Mm-hmm.
my psychotherapy practice. The people who want to do my 90-day program, I call that's a separate business that I
Mm-hmm.
do, that it's for archetypal consulting.
Mm-hmm.
Separate. But yeah, now that I'm a certified archetypal consultant, I can't not see people's archetypes. It just wouldn't be me to not at least sprinkle some in here and there.
Sure. So if you have a client that's open to it and there could be potential benefit, you would introduce it and take it from there.
Yeah. And if they're not open to it, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So tell me more about this community. Are you finding that you have a lot of support and people that you can go to that also do this work?
I have the most wonderful community of women. We've been meeting now
Mm-hmm.
for over a year. We meet every Tuesday night, and they are just so helpful. And we help each other through whatever our
Mm-hmm.
problems are. We're all slowly becoming certified, and we're bringing issues with clients so we can kind of do a group supervision. We do it for each other's clients, but also for ourselves. It's deeply, deeply powerful. And
Mm-hmm.
I probably, I know I wouldn't be as effective at what I do without this community.
Mm. It's wonderful to hear you describe them in that way. I think that that's ultimately what we're all looking for. And it really promotes longevity in this field and being able to encourage us to do our best work when we have other like-minded people that are there rooting for us and cheering us on. So are they local or are
They're
they throughout the
not
country?
local. They're around the country, mostly
Oh,
East.
that's wonderful.
And we've had some, people come in and out. Some people are not quite East Coast, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a synergy gets created, and it's all over Zoom. And some of us have met in person. I've met a couple of them in person, and they've met each other in person. We have yet to meet all together as a group, which I keep.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's incredible. Well, you should definitely plan to do that. So I can speak to the connections that can be formed virtually. And there's nothing like coming together in person. So I actually just had this opportunity. So there's a private practice community that I've become involved in virtually. And again, it's all private practitioners throughout the United States.
Mhm.
And it has been incredibly supportive and resourceful and extremely beneficial. But there are obviously some people that you connect with in a different way.
Mhm.
And I had the opportunity to go on a retreat last week and
Mhm.
meet one of the participants in person. And I cannot tell you how transformative that has been. This will now be somebody that I seek out on a more regular basis to be in her presence and feel that energy. And
You
it
know
just takes the
exactly what
support
you
to
need.
another level.
Yeah, yeah, like a soulmate. That's yeah,
Oh, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad that you have that community. So, for those listening, what do you find are some common questions that people have when you are maybe introducing this to a client, or if you have somebody who is interested and reaches out? What do you find are some of those preliminary questions that people are asking and information that you give to determine if this is right for them?
Well, people say, I've had this pattern my whole life. Am I going to be stuck here forever? That kind of a question. And,
Yeah.
I say, hopefully not. Let's, bring the awareness, and then let's understand the three levels of consciousness and
Mm-hmm.
what choices do you have for evolving them. So the answer is if they're asking me that question, then they're
Yeah.
probably not going to be stuck. They
Mm-hmm.
want to know, they want to learn, they want to go to the next level. That's why they're coming to me.
Hmm.
Mm.
So, is there anything else that you use in conjunction with this, or do you find that this model alone can really bring about a lot of that information and support and understanding that people need to change some of these patterns?
I follow a spiritual teacher. Her name is
Hmm.
Cynthia Bourgeot, and I've never met her in person, never been in her presence in person, but I've done a lot of her courses online. And I often weave in some of her work. I don't think it's
Okay.
necessary to do that. I weave in some of her work. She talks a lot about the law of three, and that's something that we can easily weave into work with archetypes. And I just draw from some of her wisdom and other people's wisdom as well. It's not only just the archetypal work that Carolyn Myss purports, although that's
Hmm.
the bulk of it. But yes, I weave in other modalities.
So, in addition to the website that you provided where people can start to peruse and see what resonates with them, are there any books or additional resources that you would recommend for people to start exploring?
Sure. Well, Carolyn Myss's book, Sacred Contracts, is kind of the
Hmm.
Bible of this particular method of doing archetypes. Anything by Carol Pearson. Carl Jung, of course, is the one who kind of brought archetypes as a concept to our human consciousness.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there's a lot that's out there.
Do you have any examples that you can provide? Obviously, not sharing a lot of personal details of these clients that have really been transformed by this work?
That's a good question. Yes. The answer is yes. A lot of it is for people to validate themselves and what their archetypes are. Like for example, I have a client who last winter on one of the coldest like one of the bitter cold weekends of the winter, a weekend where I was perfectly happy to be sitting on my couch drinking tea and like watching videos about archetypes. She comes to me the next week and she said, I had the greatest weekend. I climbed the back of whatever is the highest mountain in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. and we were using crampons and my team, and someone got injured and I had to administer first aid while we were on this mountain, and the wind chill was like some ungodly wind chill. And and part of me was just like, why on earth would anyone choose to spend like negative 40 degrees on the side of a mountain when you've got a perfectly nice couch, right? But this person has the adventurer archetype. She is the adventurer and probably the rescuer too, because she does a lot of EMT work. So those are her archetypes. And if she's not expressing them, she'll, there'll be some level of depression or anxiety because you're not expressing them. If I tried to express an archetype like that, I would not be happy. Like that would not work for me. So let's have faith in your archetypes. They'll lead you on your path, and there's always more becoming. Like if you're a pioneer, there's always the next horizon. You'll never arrive and finish being a pioneer or finish being an adventurer. Or I have a mystic archetype. We'll never finish being a mystic. There's always more becoming. So if you give yourself permission to be exactly who you are, then that's going to bring the most fulfillment, not only to your life, but you'll be creating things for the collective that they need, that we need. Our whole world desperately needs people who are lit up and passionate and touching into their divine potentials.
So if someone ultimately types at one point in their life, is that something that can be fluid, or is your type your type?
You mean choosing their archetypes?
No, yeah. So if they find what resonates, can that change over time?
I think it can. I think it can. I think especially as people evolve, like if I work with a young woman, I wouldn't expect her to have a sage or a crone archetype. That would probably happen later in her life. But she might have something else that's similar to that. I mean, the patterns will probably always be the same. They say you choose your 12, work with that one wheel, we'll cast your wheel for about a year. And then if you are thinking, well, some other ones might be more relevant to the stage of my life now, then you can, pick a few others, switch some out. So.
Interesting. And then for you personally, is there work that you do kind of in between your work with clients to continue your own journey with this?
Absolutely. There's a couple different types of charts. And so one good thing about archetypes is that we all can access all of them. Like even if you don't have a rebel archetype, we can feel what it feels like in our bodies to feel like confined and to want to break systems that aren't serving people. Like we can sort of try that on and see what that would feel like. And so if I'm waning in my confidence or something happened and I'm not feeling too good about myself, one of my favorite things to do is try on the diva archetype, which I don't come by naturally. It's not one of my 12. But if I think about how would a diva enter a room? How would she hold herself? How would she express herself? How would she expect other people to respond to her? And I love this archetype so much that I wrote a meditation called Unleash Your Inner Diva. So if anybody wants to send me an email, I will just send it to them for free because it just was a lot of fun for me to do. And I call on her when I need her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like once you have this, it's almost like an arsenal that you can call upon when you need them to help you in challenging situations. But knowing what you need is really key. Knowing what you already have inherently within you is really important.
Right.
So this is fascinating.
Yeah. Knowing what your options are. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I'm hearing is a theme is like, once you have this knowledge, then you have this ability to expand on that you, like you said, can call upon the characteristics from others, that we don't necessarily have to stay stuck, that we have, like you said, choices, options. We can just continue to evolve.
That's right. Different helpers. There are different charts you can do. Once you're 12 or solidified, there's different charts. There's one called a journey of transformation. So if there's one question that you've always had, maybe it's like you've never been lucky in love, or you've never earned the money that you think you're capable of, and there's one specific question, we can do a whole chart on just that question, and you get to pull in all the archetypes you think might be helpful to you. And then we can do a chart that way. And provide so much insight, and so much transformation can happen.
It sounds like it. So any final thoughts? Is there anything that I haven't asked you on this topic that you think that our listeners should know?
I think listeners should know that there is a divine potential for everyone's life. And it doesn't have to be this modality or this method, but to look for the patterns of divine potential that can exist in your life is really why we're here. The reason that we're here. And if we're stuck, which we all are stuck in some places, I myself am still stuck in a number of places, but instead of, like, I call it driving around the same parking lot in circles over and over again, there's a path. There are different paths to get to where you want to be. So for people not to give up and just to say, oh, this is the way it's always been, the way it's always going to be.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So this is one path that people could take to shed some light potentially.
Yep.
So if they want to learn more, or if someone listening would like to work with you, what is the best way for them to reach out or learn more?
Well, right now, I say right now because I'm getting a whole revamp of my website next month. But right now, my website is radiantlifedirection.com. And my email address is carolyngracewallace@gmail.com. And I welcome any inquiries. I also have a Facebook page called Your Radiant Life with Carolyn Wallace.
Great. I will include all of that for everyone to access easily. Well, I really appreciate the work that you do, your willingness to come on today and share it with people. And my hope is that if there's someone out there who hears about this, who has not previously known about this, that this is a new avenue for them. And maybe for those that have experienced the benefits of this, then that can be really normalizing, that we're broadening the scope and spreading the word. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review. This will help others find us and benefit as well. The Compassionate Climb podcast represents the opinions of Julia Napini and her guests. The information provided is intended for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. If that is what you are seeking, please consult an attorney.